Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Chemicals Quarterly Q3 2025 Regulatory Update. As always, I'm just going to give a little bit of orientation about the webinar platform before I introduce our speakers for today. So the webinar slides are available to the left side of your screen, along with a few helpful links if you would like to explore and learn more about compliance and risks and how we can simplify and accelerate your compliance processes. We want this webinar to be as engaging as possible, so please do send us any questions you might have and we'll aim to address them during the Q&A session at the end of this webinar. And of course, we'll follow up with you directly for any questions that we don't get to during that session. So if you would like to submit a question for the Q&A, please use the Ask a Question widget on the left side of your screen. At any time, if you're interested in having a member of our team follow up with you directly outside of the Q&A session, please use the Start a Conversation button at the bottom of your screen. And last but not least, the webinar recording will be sent to you within 24 hours. My name is Orla Morris and I'm the Content Marketing Manager here at Compliance and Risks. And I'm delighted to be joined by Cassie Persian and Kim Plashy. So Cassie Persian is a Senior Regulatory Compliance Specialist on the Content Research and Development team responsible for the creation and management of essential regulatory information. A librarian by training with 16 years experience in the consumer products industry, she specializes in global research for clients across the supply chain. Based in the Buffalo, New York area, Cassie currently enjoys a focus on product labeling and chemical restrictions, as well as her participation in ASTM standards development. Thank you so much for joining us today, Cassie.
Hi guys, thank you.
And moving over to Kim Plashy, she is a Senior Regulatory Content Specialist on the Content Research and Development team, specializing in international product safety legislation. With a strong focus on chemicals and products and environmental regulations, she stays at the forefront of the evolving regulatory landscape. Kim holds a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Studies and a Master of Library Science, both from the University at Buffalo. Before joining Compliance and Risks, Kim gained extensive experience in university, public and private libraries. She is also a published author with articles and research contributions featured in peer-reviewed journals and academic texts. Additionally, Kim has a significant experience in the consumer products testing industry and has provided research and technical support for both internal testing teams and external clients. Thanks for joining us today, Kim.
Thank you.
So before we kick off the webinar, I would like to just provide a bit of background about compliance and risks for those who are joining us for the first time today. At Compliance and Risks, our mission is to help ensure global companies have the tools and information to build safe, sustainable products in a world full of change. We are the trusted product compliance technology partner for the world's leading brands and have spent over 2 decades honing the digital tools, expertise, and content you need to stay ahead of the dynamic regulatory landscape, proving your product compliance, protecting your brands, and helping to drive your growth. And at Compliance and Risks, we have the world's most comprehensive regulatory database with over 100,000 regulations historically available in C2P. With a global regulatory coverage and expertise across over 10 industries, we understand that regulatory compliance definitely doesn't sleep. And our regulatory expert team is truly global, with 28 languages collectively spoken across the team, all fortified by our 30 knowledge partners. As mentioned, C2P is our enterprise SME-led software, the key to unlocking market access as new products can be designed and built with full confidence you've met all compliance obligations. And this includes features such as early warning alerts, impact probability, productivity workflow tools, and so much more. And with that, I'm delighted to hand it over to you, Kim.
Great, thank you so much. So our agenda for today is I'm starting us off on the Western Hemisphere, south to north, and then passing it off to Cassie, who will cover the rest of the world. So kicking things off in South America with Brazil, this is one that we have all been following closely. Back in May, Brazil temporarily suspended the public consultation on the draft implementing regulation to their law number 15.022, what we are all calling Brazil's REACH. The consultation was originally scheduled to run for 30 days, ending on June 13th, but it was abruptly pulled from consultation by the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change to make what they were calling necessary adjustments. That draft has now been reopened and officially submitted to the World Trade Organization for comment. I do want to note that the draft regulation is the same that was released and then taken down back in May, but there are no additional updates at this time regarding when the final regulations themselves will be published. Another REACH-like law in the Southern Hemisphere that we are tracking is for Colombia. I just want to remind everybody that just a few weeks ago, the September 30th deadline for industrial submissions passed. Those that registered chemical substances in 2025 needed to report the 2024 annual volumes in the national platform by the end of last month. On September 13th, Peru enacted their Supreme Decree number 18 of 2025. This one is establishing a comprehensive technical regulation for the sanitary and environmental management of polychlorinated biphenyls. The regulation prioritizes protecting human health and improving environmental quality through management, decontamination, and elimination of PCB stocks and wastes. It also imposes restrictions on public and private entities handling PCBs or contaminated materials and covers inventory, labeling, storage, transport, and disposal. The regulation aligns with the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants. Deadlines requiring PCBs to be inventoried is December 31st, 2025, and an elimination by December 31st, 2028. Continuing up north, starting at the federal level in the US, the EPA is reconsidering its final 2024 risk management rule for perchloroethylene under the Toxic Substances Control Act. The original rule, which was released in December 2024, imposed strict restrictions on PCE by prohibiting numerous industrial and commercial uses, establishing workplace exposure controls, and eliminating consumer access to the chemical. This was due to findings that it poses an unreasonable risk to health. However, following multiple legal challenges as well as input from industry and advocacy groups, the EPA opened a 30-day public comment period on July 30th. They intended to hear broad stakeholder feedback before any further rulemaking or amendments would be proposed. The agency is especially keen to hear feedback on the appropriateness of the existing chemical exposure limits, alternative or additional risk management strategies, and the treatment of PCE in industrial applications, including dry cleaning. That comment period closed on August 29th. The EPA also released its draft risk evaluation for octamethyl we're going to call it D4. I have it on the slide there. This is one of those mouthfuls I was able to get through yesterday. But so with D4, this is presenting an unreasonable risk to human health and the environment under certain conditions of use according to the draft risk evaluation. The agency's preliminary findings indicate that workers that are involved in the manufacture, processing, and use of D4 in applications such as adhesive sealants, paints, and coatings, as well as consumers using certain paints and coatings, are at the greatest risk of exposure. Environmental concerns were highlighted for 7 specific uses of D4, where releases to the water and sediment could be harmful, although the draft does not find unreasonable risk for the general population or other evaluated uses at this time. So it is just those 7. The risk determinations do not assume the use of personal protective equipment, although its use may reduce those identified risks. Public comment on the draft evaluation is open until November 17th, and the agency has scheduled a preparatory meeting for November 18th, as well as a peer review by the Science Advisory Committee on Chemicals in early December. After consideration of public and expert input, the EPA will finalize its determination, which could ultimately lead to new regulations on D4 in commercial and workplace settings. There have been a few updates to various lists of substances for significant new use rules. Just my reminder that I give every quarter that when a SNUR is made, it amends 40 CFR Part 721 to add the named substances to the ongoing list. Manufacturers and importers must notify the EPA at least 90 days before starting any activity that is designated as a significant new use. That notification then prompts the EPA to evaluate the conditions of the proposed use, and production cannot begin until a determination is made and any required actions based on the determination are taken. So first up, on July 29th, the EPA formally withdrew the proposed SNURs it issued back in June 2023. These would have regulated 18 chemical substances produced from post-consumer plastic waste. The withdrawal is due to the EPA also rescinding the underlying TSCA Subpart 5E consent order that formed the basis for those proposed SNURs. The EPA stated it will revisit how chemicals derived from plastic waste should be regulated through broader scientific assessment. On July 23rd, a correction was published to the SNUR for batch 2425E substances. This action corrects a regulatory amendment established in the final rule that appears in the Federal Register of June 23, 2025. The amendment to the table in 40 CFR Part 9 is removed because EPA subsequently issued a separate amendment to the part that makes this change obsolete and unnecessary. That correction came into effect on August 22nd. There were also two final rules issuing new chemical substances. The first was on July 29th, adding 31 new substances to Subpart E. This one became effective on September 29th. I have listed some of the chemicals in each of these on the slide here, but please do see the official rule for a complete list. On July 27th, the 24 3.5E batch was released, and that one came into effect on September 15th. The EPA issued an interim final rule on July 2nd to extend the compliance deadline for amendments to the National Volatile Organic Compound Emission Standards for aerosol coatings under the Clean Air Act. The compliance deadline for fulfilling these amended requirements is now set for January 17, 2027, replacing the previous July 17, 2025 target. The rule responds to industry petitions for more time to reformulate, relabel, and update affected aerosol coatings. Public comments on the interim rule were accepted until August 1st. The EPA will consider that feedback and may update the final rule accordingly. Moving on to the Food and Drug Administration, on August 6th, the administration announced that the use of fluoropolymers in medical devices is safe and that there is no current reason to restrict their continued use. This includes polytetrafluoroethylene. The conclusion was based on a review of a 2021 review conducted in partnership with the Emergency Care Research Institute, which is a Department of Health and Human Services patient safety organization. The study reviewed data from over 1,800 healthcare providers, 1,700 peer-reviewed scientific articles, as well as real-world clinical surveillance. The study found no conclusive evidence of patient care issues linked to PTFE in medical devices. The FDA did emphasize that fluoropolymers perform essential functions in medical devices, including lubrication for stents, electrical insulation for pacemaker wires, and biostability, allowing these devices to remain safely implanted for longer periods, and that no alternative methods with comparable efficacy currently exist. The FDA does make a point to differentiate these large molecule fluoropolymers from smaller PFAS compounds that have been linked to environmental and health concerns, noting the inert and stable nature of fluoropolymers and their very low potential for patient toxicity. Now, with news from the CPSC, on September 29th, the agency formally withdrew 4 proposals dated between October 2009 and July 2024. Of particular interest for us in this webinar, a proposed ban on certain aerosol dusters that we covered last year is no longer under consideration. Back in July 2024, the CPSC had proposed a ban on certain aerosol duster products containing more than 18 milligrams in any combination of HFC 152A and HFC 134A. This was under the Federal Hazardous Substances Act. The CPSC noted that from 2012 to 2021 that there were more than 1,000 deaths and 21,000 treated injuries as a result of the inhalation of these aerosol duster products. However, with the withdrawal of the rule, the CPSC notice states that the agency does not intend to pursue these proposals with no additional information provided. On September 16th, the United States reintroduced S-2811 H5373, more commonly known as the Alan Reinstein Ban Asbestos Now Act. The bill seeks to amend TSCA to enact a comprehensive prohibition on the manufacture, processing, use, and distribution of all commercial asbestos types. This bill covers the 6 recognized commercial asbestos fibers as well as 2 lesser regulated fibers that I've listed on the slide. It bans their use outright from the date of enactment, with limited exemptions for the chlor-alkali industry until January 1st, 2030, and a narrowly tailored national security exemption granted by the president, which would be subject to strict conditions and transparency requirements. This legislation aims to close substantial health protection gaps left by prior EPA rules, which ban only chrysotile asbestos partially and allowed continued limited uses. The bill is now pending committee review in the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. Moving on to what we have happening in the states, I did check this morning. This is something I'm checking every day. We're starting with California, where as of this morning, we are still waiting to hear if Governor Newsom will sign 2 bills that we're tracking. These were passed and sent to the governor in September, and they must be signed by October 12th to be enacted. First, we have SB 682, which accelerates previously adopted timelines for PFAS, introducing broad prohibitions on the sale of new products containing intentionally added PFAS as early as January 1st, 2028. This includes bans on PFAS in cleaning products, juvenile products, food packaging, dental floss, and ski wax, with additional restrictions on cookware taking effect by 2030. AB 823 marks the newest development in the state's microplastics framework. Earlier this year, we covered the Department of Toxic Substances Control's proposal to add microplastics to the candidate chemicals list. Now the legislature has passed this more targeted statutory ban. It would extend the state's plastic microbeads nuisance prevention law by prohibiting, beginning on January 1st, 2029, the sale or promotion of personal care products containing plastic glitter, non-rinse-off personal care products with plastic microbeads, and cleaning products with plastic microbeads. A limited sell-through period would be allowed until January 1st, 2030 for existing stock of glitter-containing products. In Illinois, last quarter, we reported that HB 2516 was sent to their governor in June. This was enacted on August 15th. The enacted bill amends the PFAS Reduction Act, introducing significant new restrictions on products containing intentionally added PFAS. The act bans the sale or distribution of cosmetics, dental floss, juvenile products, menstrual products, and intimate apparel with intentionally added PFAS effective January 2032. The law defines juvenile products as items designed for children under 10, naming crib strollers and car seats as examples. Intimate apparel is defined as garments intended to be worn under clothes in direct contact with skin, specifically including bras, boxers, briefs, sleepwear, thermal socks, and stockings. Maine continues to refine its landmark PFAS product law with the new rulemaking around currently unavoidable uses. On July 23rd, the Department of Environmental Protection proposed amendments to Chapter 90 that would formally designate two specific CUUs of intentionally added PFAS, allowing limited products to remain on the market beyond that statewide sales prohibition that begins January 2026. The two proposed CUUs cover PFAS used in internal cartridge valves in cleaning product containers and vented cap liners for certain cleaning product containers. Each designation would last until January 2031, after which manufacturers would again face a prohibition unless a further rulemaking extends them. Manufacturers whose products fall under these CUU determinations must file notifications with the department to continue using PFAS. The classification system is intended as a narrow time-limited allowance where feasible non-PFAS alternatives are not currently available. We will continue to track and provide updates on PFAS CUU determinations in this state and others. Massachusetts is advancing its comprehensive framework to regulate toxic chemicals in children's products with Bill H. 4357. This was reported favorably from the committee on August 7th, and it is now before the House Ways and Means. It would create a new Section 29 in the general laws, granting the Department of Environmental Protection broad authority to regulate chemicals in children's products. The law defines children's product generally as covering items ranging from toys and clothing to school supplies and bedding. This bill would prohibit the sale, distribution, or manufacture of children's products containing intentionally added PFAS, with compliance measured through a total organic fluorine threshold to be set by the department. It would also establish two critical regulatory tools. The first, a chemicals of concern list, to be updated at least every 3 years, and a subset high priority chemicals list, which would trigger mandatory manufacturer reporting and phase out obligations. So this framework would place Massachusetts in line with other leading states, including Maine, Oregon, and New York, as well as others, by creating a tiered system of concern lists, high priority designations, reporting obligations, and gradual phase outs. The Massachusetts legislative session officially ends on January 6th, so we'll keep watching this one. Speaking of toxic-free kids, the Minnesota Toxic-Free Kids program published its 5th update to the chemicals of high concern list in July. This update added 15 new chemicals and removed 200 based on review of recent toxicology research and statutory requirements. A chemical of high concern is defined by Minnesota statute as a chemical with credible scientific evidence indicating it can harm fetal or child development, cause cancer, disrupt hormones, damage the nervous or immune systems, or be persistent and bioaccumulative. The Toxic-Free Kids program is mandated to update their list every 3 years, with this 2025 update being the 5th revision since the program's inception in 2009. Minnesota has officially extended the initial reporting deadline for PFAS and products from January 1st, 2026 to July 1st, 2026. The decision was announced by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency on July 23rd, and it provides manufacturers, importers, and domestic distributors additional time to prepare for that compliance under the PFAS and products law. It also allows time for reporters to become familiar with the forthcoming PFAS reporting and information system of Minnesota, what they're calling PRISM, a new platform that we are expecting in late 2025 for simplification of that reporting process. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation has initiated pre-rulemaking activities for their PFAS and apparel law. A public webinar and comment session was held on August 25th. Comments on the rulemaking topics discussed were accepted via email until September 25th. The law prohibits the sale of new apparel containing intentionally added PFAS starting January 1st, 2025. An additional phase of restrictions begins January 1st, 2028, targeting outdoor apparel specifically designed for wet conditions, with limits on PFAS content to be established by future regulation. Finishing up here with Canada, they have been pretty quiet again this quarter on the chemicals front. There were a few ministerial conditions issued under the Environmental Protection Act, which I've listed here. These have various potential uses, including those that I've highlighted on the slide. So please be sure to check the texts if you think you might use these. Just my reminder again that I give every quarter regarding these authorizations that when these conditions are imposed, notifiers can manufacture or import the covered substance, but it must meet the restrictions in the condition. The types of restrictions that may apply include quantities of the substance, physical forms, and uses allowed. And just three more to mention here. These three conditions apply to chemicals that have various uses in the pharmaceutical and agrochemical industries, as well as for research purposes. Again, if these apply to your business, please be sure to find the appropriate text in a web search or in C2P. Quite a few orders were published in the last quarter amending the domestic substances and non-domestic substances list. We don't have time, obviously, to cover each of the substances and restrictions named in these, but I did want to be sure that I put the citations here so you can find them and review them when the recording is sent out. The DSL is Canada's inventory of substances manufactured in or imported into the country on a commercial scale. When a chemical is added to the list, it is considered existing and generally does not require new regulatory assessment before its use. However, the non-DSL includes substances that are not currently widely used in Canada, but are known to be present in international commerce. NDSL substances are considered new to Canada, and importing or manufacturing them may require notification and risk assessment, though with fewer data requirements than for substances that are not listed at all. And that is all from me. I am passing it off now to you, Cassie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Kim. I'm going to hop right into Australia, where we have some proposals that we covered last quarter for mercury and flame retardant DBDPE, and these have been finalized in Australia. So amendments expand and revise chemical listings under several schedules of the register with new requirements for management under ICHEMS. Key changes include the addition of aryl sulfonite hydrotopes to Schedule 2 and the replacement of entries in Schedule 4 covering dichloroethane and Schedule 5 covering dibromoethane and MMT. Schedule 6 was also expanded to include DBDPE and related substances, as well as mercury and mercury compounds. These substances, whether used individually or in mixtures, must comply with the ICHEMS minimum standards. The amendments will take effect in stages between January 1st of 2026 and January 1st of 2027, with mercury controls beginning July 1st of 2026. And then hopping right over across to the Middle East, in July, Saudi Arabia Standards Metrology and Quality Organization, or SASO, issued a draft regulation revising its RoHS framework. The proposal aligns with their new product safety law, adds 4 phthalates to the restricted list, and largely mirrors EU RoHS, though medical devices are still excluded. It sets detailed obligations for manufacturers and other economic operators, including conformity assessment, technical documentation, declarations of conformity, risk assessments, product testing, and corrective actions. Comments were due on August 22nd. And then going over into Asia, on August 14th, China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology released a draft standard to replace GB 15258 on chemical safety labels. The draft sets rules for the content, design, and use of labels, adding new features such as safety information code, updated hazard statement order, provisions for small packages and folded labels, and requirements for kit packaging. Labels must include chemical identification, hazard pictograms, signal words, precautionary statements, supplier details, and they may also use QR codes. Special rules allow simplified labels for small containers, which are equal to or less than 100 milliliters, and then minimal information for very small containers, which is less than or equal to 5 milliliters, provided that full labels appear on outer packaging. Labels must be clearly visible on containers and follow strict formatting. And examples of this are provided in the annexes of the standard. Public comments are open until October 12th. Also in China, on August 1st, their Standardization Administration and the Chinese Administration for Market Regulation published GB 26572. This new mandatory RoHS standard governs the restricted use of hazardous substances in electrical and electronic products. The regulation applies to EEE sold or imported into China that operate on electric current or electromagnetic fields and fall below 1,500 volts direct current and 1,000 volts alternating current. The standard establishes both substance restriction limits and labeling requirements with different obligations depending on whether a product is listed in the official catalog of hazardous substances. So Category 1 products, which are those listed in the catalog, must meet both the hazardous substance limits detailed in Section 5 and the labeling rules in Section 6, while Category 2 products, which are those not listed, are only subject to labeling requirements. Annex A of this standard sets maximum concentration values for 10 substances, including heavy metals, polybrominated biphenyls, PBDEs, and phthalates. Manufacturers and importers must provide clear labeling regarding the presence of hazardous substances. Labels can take the form of standardized figures or be integrated into QR codes under specific conditions. Products used for production support are exempt from direct labeling, but they do require suppliers to provide sufficient information for compliance. This standard will take effect on August 1st of 2027. A 3-year transitional period has been set. So products manufactured or imported before implementation must comply with the new requirements by August 1st of 2028. On September 20th, Japan's Health, Trade, and Environment Ministries proposed amendments to the Chemical Substance Control Law to strengthen restrictions on PFHXS-related compounds. These substances would be added to the list of Class 1 specified chemicals, making their manufacture, import, and use prohibited except under limited exemptions. The amendment also bans the import of certain products containing PFHXS, including water and oil-based repellent textiles, semiconductor etching agents and resists, plating treatment agents, anti-reflection coatings, protective sprays, and firefighting foams. In addition, Japan plans to end the transitional allowance for fluoropolymer alcohol, which will no longer qualify as a permitted substitute chemical. This change takes effect in December of this year, 2025, while the broader PFHXS restrictions are scheduled to begin in June of 2026. Public comments are open for this until October 15th. With growing global efforts to regulate PFAS, Taiwan has made moves to specify uses and establish management requirements. On August 5th, Taiwan's Ministry of Environment issued a draft announcement creating a list of PFAS subject to control. The list is based on the Toxic and Concerned Chemical Substances Control Act, which authorizes control concentrations and tiered operational thresholds for concerned substances. The draft regulation introduces tiered thresholds with control concentrations set at 0.1%. PFAS polymers or gases above the threshold but below 30% by weight must be clearly labeled on containers or packaging, while concentrations at or above 30% trigger the full requirements of the Act, which includes stricter management obligations. Operators already handling these substances will need to meet compliance deadlines, while substances regulated under the Taiwanese law, other Taiwanese laws, are excluded from these controls. Other provisions require operators to properly manage PFAS following recognized testing standards and label relevant products where applicable. Public comments were due yesterday, and if adopted, the regulation will take effect on January 1st of 2026. On August 15th, the Cabinet of Ministers of Uzbekistan adopted a resolution introducing technical regulations on restricting the use of hazardous substances in electrical and electronic products. These rules apply to a range of EEE, which are listed out in its Annex 1, but they do exclude some categories such as defense equipment, solar panels, industrial machinery, medical devices, used goods, and items for research purposes. The regulation aligns with EU RoHS by setting maximum concentration limits for hazardous substances in Annex 2 and listing exemptions in Annex 3. Before being placed on the market in Uzbekistan, covered products must undergo conformity assessment, either through a declaration or certification, after which they must bear a conformity mark. Documentation in the state language is required, including product specifications, environmental measures, and manufacturer contact details. User manuals must be provided in paper form with electronic formats permitted for non-household products. This regulation took effect, resolution took effect on August 16th, while the technical regulations becoming enforceable in February 16th of 2026. And then last quarter, we shared Vietnam's plan to implement their new law on chemicals, which was approved in June. And they have not wasted any time in drafting decrees to make it happen. So on September 5th, the Vietnamese government published 3 drafts to guide the implementation of the new law, which is set to enter into force on January 1st of 2026. First, the draft decree on management of chemical activities and hazardous chemicals in products and goods sets the rules for producing, trading, storing, and importing chemicals through the National Single Window System. It covers registering new chemicals, recognizing major foreign inventories like ECHA and EPA, and creating a national chemical list by 2028. It also requires labeling, disclosure, testing, and record keeping for hazardous chemicals in products. The next one is the draft decree on chemical industry development, safety, and security. And this introduces a national strategy for chemical industry growth and green chemistry projects. It mandates safety and security measures across facilities, transport, packaging, and labeling, along with the prevention and emergency response plans, drills, and reporting into a national database. And then finally, the decree on chemical lists issues official key chemicals, restricted or controlled substances, and those governed by international treaties. It also lists chemicals requiring incident prevention and response planning, and authorizes training programs for chemical safety. And we'll move into Europe now, where the EU is never not busy. So on July 8th, the European Commission unveiled an action plan to strengthen the competitiveness and modernization of the EU chemicals industry. Key measures include the creation of a critical chemical alliance to safeguard production capacity, expand trade defense tools, lower energy costs, incentivize clean chemical markets, invest in innovation hubs, and address PFAS through strict limits and safer alternatives. Alongside this, the Commission presented its sixth simplification omnibus, expected to save the industry over 360 million euro annually by streamlining labeling, cosmetics, and fertilizer rules, and propose reforms to enhance ECHA's governance and resources. So aside from dates of application and transitional provision adjustments, changes to the classification, labeling, and packaging, or CLP regulation, introduce significant labeling simplifications. Digital contact information would be allowed in place of physical addresses, as well as streamlined labeling for very small packaging, the removal of fixed deadlines for label updates, relaxed formatting rules, and expanded use of digital labeling. Amendments to the cosmetic regulation simplify procedures relating to substances classified as carcinogenic, mutagenic, and reprotoxic, or CMRs, they're also known as well as it also establishes a process for adding ingredients like colorants and preservatives to annexes. And it also aligns timelines for derogation requests with changes to the CLP rules. They also remove pre-notification obligations. They clarify treatment of nanomaterials and confirm that internationally recognized nomenclature may be used for labeling. The initiative also simplifies the fertilizing products regulation by aligning it with the standard REACH provisions, introducing criteria for assessing microorganisms, removing the unbundling clause on delegated acts, and bringing the regulation in line with broader EU proposals. On August 11th, the European Commission adopted a regulation amending Annex 17 of REACH to include newly classified CMR substances of Category 1B. This aligns REACH with the latest CLP updates. The amendment adds several substances and compounds to Appendices 2, 4, and 6 of Annex 17, which set restrictions for CMRs. This took effect on August 31st, with the new restrictions applying from September 1st. On another interesting note, in July, the Commission launched a call for evidence to identify ways to reduce administrative burdens in environmental legislation, including circular economy measures, industrial emissions, and waste management rules. One key element under this consultation is the possible discontinuation of the SCIP database. This tracks substances of concern in products under the Waste Framework Directive. So ending SCIP could significantly reduce reporting obligations for companies by eliminating duplication with REACH requirements. Comments were due on September 10th, with a legislative proposal expected later this year. The European Commission also adopted a delegated regulation amending the persistent organic pollutants regulation on July 24th. It refines exemption thresholds for polybrominated diphenyl ethers, which are tetra, penta, hexa, hepta, and deca-BDEs. These substances are generally restricted, but may occur as unintentional trace contaminants, particularly in recycled materials. So for mixtures and articles containing recovered materials, the UTC limits will be progressively reduced from 500 milligrams upon entry into force to 350 milligrams per kilogram from December 2025, down to 200 milligrams per kilogram from December 2027. This phased approach balances the need to tighten controls with the technical feasibility of the recycling process. For all other mixtures and articles, a uniform and more stringent limit of 10 milligrams per kilogram applies. On September 8th, the European Commission adopted a delegated directive amending its RoHS legislation to renew and update several Annex 3 exemptions concerning the use of lead in electrical and electronic equipment. The updates primarily extend exemption deadlines while clarifying technical conditions under which lead may continue to be used. For glass and ceramics, exemptions are extended until June or December of 2027, depending on application. In solders, the revised exemption allows continued use of high lead alloys under specific technical conditions with expiry dates of June or December of 2027. And then for lead as an alloying element in steel, limits of up to 0.35% lead are permitted in certain applications, expiring by mid-2027. Aluminum exemptions allow up to 0.4% lead with conditions for recycled materials and specific uses, also phasing out between 12 and 18 months after entry into force or by June of 2027, depending on the category. Copper alloys may contain up to 4% lead until June of 2027, subject to child safety restrictions and limits on lead release rates. On August 20th, the European Chemicals Agency published an updated proposal to restrict PFAS under EU's REACH regulation. So the revision was originally prepared in January of 2023. I'm sorry, the revision was prepared by the original submitters in January 2023, Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, and Sweden. And the update reflects the evaluation of more than 5,600 scientific and technical comments gathered during the public consultation that was held between March and September of 2023. The updated proposal expands its scope by including 8 additional sectors that were not specifically addressed. These include printing, sealing, machinery, medical packaging, military uses, explosives, technical textiles, and broader industrial applications. The submitters also examined alternative restriction approaches beyond a full ban or bans with time-limited exemptions. These alternatives consider whether PFAS could be allowed under controlled conditions. ECHA's risk assessment and socioeconomic analysis committees are currently reviewing the updated restriction. Their evaluations will guide the European Commission, which will ultimately decide on the adoption of the PFAS restriction in consultation with EU member states. Moving on from the EU, on August 28th, the Eurasian Economic Commission released the draft decision to update their sanitary and hygienic requirements for polymeric food contact material. These requirements, which govern materials and articles made from polymeric and other substances intended for contact with food, have not been updated since 2010. So this proposal aims to modernize the framework by standardizing product assessments, clarifying organoleptic and hygienic safety indicators for materials in contact with food, and introducing safety indicators for additional materials such as wood, cork, and rubber. Expanded labeling requirements require that product markings be durable, abrasion resistant, and apply directly to the product or its documentation. Manufacturers must provide clear identification of the material used, a digital code or abbreviation, and symbols indicating suitability for food contact. Accompanying documents must also provide detailed product information in Russian and, where required, the official languages of EAEU member states, and comments are due for this on October 27th. On August 7th, the French Ministry of Ecological Transition launched a second public consultation on a draft decree establishing residual concentration thresholds for PFAS under Law 188. This law prohibits the use of PFAS in cosmetics, waxes, clothing, footwear, and waterproofing agents from January 1st of 2026, with the ban extended to all textiles from 2030. The decree clarifies that the prohibitions will not apply when PFAS are present only as trace contamination, defined as below 25 parts per billion for individual PFAS excluding polymers, 250 parts per billion for the total sum of PFAS excluding polymers, and 50 parts per million for PFAS including polymers. The decree also addresses exemptions, specifying that protective clothing and footwear governed by the EU PPE regulation, along with waterproofing agents used for PPE, are excluded from the 2026 restrictions. For the broader 2030 ban on all textiles, exemptions apply to technical and essential use textiles where no alternatives exist. This includes industrial applications and essential purposes such as high-risk PPE, military and civil protection gear, and sanitary medical textiles. The decree was open for public consultation until September 5th. And following up on a proposal we discussed in the Q1 webinar, Turkey finalized procedures and principles for implementing the country's KKDIK regulation. That's their REACH regulation. This was on August 12th. So key provisions include requirements for companies to submit pre-registration data by October 31st or within 30 days of placing a substance on the market. The one substance, one registration rule mandates joint submissions unless justified otherwise, with lead registrants to be determined by the end of 2025 or within 6 months for new market entries. Joint registration groups will be responsible for preparing shared documentation. The regulation also creates chemical science and advisory groups to provide technical expertise and policy guidance. It requires updates to registration files within 3 months of new obligations, and it sets rules for uploading safety data sheets into the ministry's system. Registration is considered complete once all tonnage-based requirements are met. Through extensions of up to 2 years may be requested. The procedures entered into force immediately upon their publication on August 12th of 2025. Turkey also published a draft regulation on the use of recycled plastics in food contact materials. This was on July 28th. The draft establishes procedures and principles for producing, processing, importing, and distributing recycled plastics intended for food contact, as well as requirements for evaluating the decontamination process. It applies to recycled plastics and materials containing them, but excludes the production stages of monomers and starting substances already authorized under food legislation. Key obligations for recycling companies and converters focus on safety, traceability, and quality control. A quality assurance system must be maintained with documented procedures, quality control plans, and methods to verify effectiveness. Companies are required to keep batch quality records for at least 5 years and provide written declarations of conformity for both recycled plastics and materials containing them. Labeling recycled plastics with facility details, batch information, and recycled content percentages is also required. And comments were due by August 16th. And finally, on July 14th, the UK government launched a consultation on proposals to extend the UK REACH transitional registration submission deadlines, which currently fall in October of 2026, 2028, and 2030. So when the UK left EU, the registration data previously held under EU REACH was not transferred, meaning businesses must now provide this information under UK REACH. The Alternative Transitional Registration Model, or ATRM, first proposed in a 2024 consultation, will set out what information is required, but its design is still being finalized. Because the ATRM legislative changes cannot be delivered before the first deadline in October of 2026, the government is proposing new phased deadlines. The 3 options here on the slide are under consultation. However, the government prefers the first option, which is October of 2029, October of 2030, and October of 2031. This would allow more time to finalize ATRM details, provide industry with a 2-year transition period, and balance the need for timely submission with regulator requirements. And that is it from my side. I'm going to turn it back to Orla.
Brilliant. Thank you both so much for that amazing presentation, and thank you to everyone for your attention so far. I know we're coming close to the top of the hour, so our Q&A session won't be as long as normal, but we do now have the floor open for it. So as mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, if any of you have any questions that you would like us to answer, please do let us know using the Ask a Question widget to the left side of your screen. We've had a lot of questions come in, so I'll just quickly go to the first one now. Has there been any update on the PFAS reporting restrictions in Washington State?
Okay, that one's for me. So back in June, the Department of Ecology published a rule change and reporting requirements were proposed to take effect in January 2026. The comments on that one were due at the end of July. The department noted at that time that the proposed date of adoption would be, I think it was October 15th of this year. But as of last week, when I last took a look at this, there were no updates yet.
Sorry, Kim, the audio was just a bit blurry at the end there. If you could just repeat what you...
Sorry, I'm struggling with the sore throat. Sorry. So yeah, so the department did note that the proposed change would be in effect October 15th, 2025, I think it was. But as of last week, when I last checked this, there have been no publications yet.
Okay, brilliant. That was loud and clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think we'll have time for one more question. What is considered a technical textile?
I could take this one. Orla, thank you. So this technical textiles was mentioned as an exemption in the France PFAS restriction and also the EU one as well. So technical textiles are primarily used for their performance and function rather than for their decorative or aesthetic characteristics. So things like protective clothing, medical implants, geotextiles, and like automotive fabrics, those would be considered technical textiles. But a lot of these are going to be defined in the actual laws themselves as well. So.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And yeah, as we're getting close to the top of the hour, any other questions that were submitted through the Q&A widget, we'll follow up with you directly for them. We'll also send around the Q&A of the full webinar to all attendees so that you'll get to see the questions and answers. But yeah, still, if you do have questions, submit them now, and Kim and Cassie will answer them and we'll reach back to you directly. But with that, I just want to thank you all for tuning in with us today. And we once again really hope you found it helpful and look forward to seeing you in our upcoming webinars. You can check out the resources section on our website to stay updated and to access our latest white papers, guides, blogs, and webinars, both on demand and upcoming. And we do have plenty of upcoming content, so make sure to keep an eye out. Our next webinar, Emerging Human Rights Due Diligence Regulations Across the Globe, is scheduled for October 22nd. And we also have another webinar if you're a customer of Compliance and Risks. Our customer-only product roadmap webinar is on October 23rd, where our experts will walk you through how we're transforming product compliance with the first AI-native compliance intelligence platform. So we do hope to see you there. Thank you all so much again for joining us today, and thank you to Kim and Cassie for another wonderful presentation.